Good morning.
Guten Morgen, Frau Manns.
Good morning.
Hallo, ist da Herr Müller?
Ja, ich bin da.
Ah, okay. Guten Morgen. Ich hatte ihn gestern noch geschrieben.
Ja, klar. Alles
Dass,
klar, alles gut.
Nur zur Info, unsere Zuschauer sind jetzt auch drin. Das heißt, die können uns alle hören.
ach so, okay. Dann good morning to everybody.
Hallo?
Guten Morgen, Herr Müller.
Hello.
Hallo. Wann soll ich loslegen?
Sie sind dann ungefähr um 9:30 Uhr dran. Nach der Frau Manns.
9:30 Uhr. Ah,
Ungefähr 9:20 Uhr, 9:30 Uhr. Genau.
okay. Gut.
Sie geben mir auch ein Zeichen, wenn ich anfangen soll, meinen Bildschirm zu teilen. Richtig?
Genau, ich mache jetzt erstmal dann eine kleine Einleitung und dann übergebe ich direkt auf Sie.
Wunderbar.
Frau Manns und Herr Müller, Sie sollten sich dann bei Ihrem Zoom-Feld ist ja unten dieser kleine Globus, dass Sie sich bitte auf Englisch stellen.
Erledigt?
Danke.
So, jetzt kann ich Frau Manns nämlich auf der englischen Spur auch hören. Das ist gut.
Eine Sekunde, bin sofort zurück.
Herr Müller, haben Sie sich bei dem kleinen Globus unten auch auf Englisch gestellt?
Jetzt, ja.
Okay, super, danke.
Wie viele Teilnehmer haben wir denn überhaupt? Kann man das schon sagen?
Also registriert sind es 107.
Ui,
Allerdings sind noch nicht alle drin. Aber ich schätze mal, die kommen dann so peu à peu.
wie viel sind es jetzt?
Momentan, wir sind jetzt gerade bei knapp 50.
Good morning, everyone. We are still waiting for a few participants to join our webinar. So I would like to ask to wait for a few more minutes. Thank you.
Moment, ich habe nicht zugehört. Ich habe jetzt auf Koreanisch gestellt.
Manchmal geht mein Video also Dings. Sieht man dann nicht. Ja, ich warte kurz bis. Good morning. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the 9th Korea Europe Global Partnering event. I'm very happy to note that despite everyone's busy schedules, we have over 100 participants registered in our seminar today. This is very exciting, and thank you all for joining today. My name is Dina Zlatina, and I'm a marketing consultant with Kotra in Frankfurt. And on behalf of Kotra Frankfurt, I will be your guide for today's webinar. In the past few years, and unfortunately this year again, the automotive sector and in general, all businesses are facing great challenges. But I hope that as we are overcoming those challenges, our webinar and the consecutive matchmaking events will be a good opportunity to take a big step to a successful future with new business opportunities. Today, we are delighted to introduce 4 very interesting presentations regarding future mobility in the automotive sector. Before we start, however, I would like to clear up some technicalities first. We are offering our webinar in 2 languages, English and Korean. On the bottom of your Zoom screen, you can see an interpretation select menu. If you want to listen to the presentations in English, please select English. If you want to listen in Korean, please select Korean. Aside from that, we will have a Q&A session after each presentation. During the presentations, you are free to use the chatting function to leave questions or comments to our presenters. Around 2 to 3 questions will be selected and discussed at the end of each session. I hope we are all cleared on the functions now. And with that, I would like to introduce our first speaker of the day, Ms. Angela Manz from the VDA, the German Association of the Automotive Industry. Ms. Angela Manz graduated from the Johann Wolfgang Goethe University in Frankfurt with a master's degree in economics and is currently the head of trade and foreign relations at VDA. Ms. Manz will present today on the topic of the German market and the international relations in the automotive industry. Ms. Manz, you are welcome to start your presentation.
Yeah, thank you very much. Is it possible that I share the screen as in the PowerPoint? There are some.
Yes, sure.
Yeah, I will. Then, yeah, good morning, everybody. I'm very happy that I can be with you today. As it was mentioned, there are times now where we face a lot of challenges, especially if you look at the Ukraine, the war, which is just within Europe. So I would like to say that the whole VDA is a little bit under shock at this point of time. I will come back later also to the economic consequences of this crisis, of this war. But of course, in the heart, we are with the people, and this is very important for me to mention at the beginning. And yes, I thank a lot to KOTRA because we are long-standing partners, and this is very important at this point of time. And I would like to introduce to you, if you don't know VDA yet, I would like to explain a little bit about our association and the current challenges. And of course, if you are a supplier in Korea, how to get involved with us, with the German automotive industry. And you're welcome, of course, always. And I would like to share some information with you. And I think later you can also have the presentation to have a deeper look at it, as we have not so much time to look at every detail. So VDA is a quite old association, more than 100 years old. And what is somehow special, if you compare our association with the other automotive industry association worldwide, is that we have members from the manufacturers and the suppliers. Yeah, I know from Korea that they are, for example, separated organizations. Sometimes this is good because you can fight for the suppliers, especially maybe different as if you are in one association, but also together we are very strong. So our members are the producing companies from from Germany and suppliers and the producers of trailers and bodies from the commercial vehicle sectors. I'm also very happy to meet my colleague, Mr. Müller, Frank Müller, from the e-mobility sector, which is somehow complementing our industry. Yeah, VDA was founded, as I mentioned before, more than 100 years ago, and we are headquartered in Berlin, and we have an office in China, and we have some also the quality management center, which we also have a branch in Moscow, which is of course now silent, but our worldwide quality management system has also licensed partners, of course, in Korea. And I think you all know the VDA QMC quality management standards, which have meanings for the worldwide automotive industry. We do not only represent the interests of the industry, but we also organize a lot of events, and among them is the IAA, which was well known as Frankfurt Motor Show, and is now for passenger cars in Munich and for commercial cars in Hanover. I would also like to welcome and invite you to this later, because it's a good chance also to meet the companies from the German automotive industry. Yeah, here's a chart about our VDA, our president, Mrs. Müller, Hildegard Müller. She is heading this organization since 2 years, since the beginning of Corona. So also VDA is under a challenge as we work remote mostly, and hopefully we can come back soon to the office. But the world has changed, and it has also advantages as we can meet here, but it's also, of course, a challenge. And we have 3 different sections in our association, and for international trade, Mr. Andreas Rades, our new managing director, and he comes from VDMA, which you also might know, the machinery sector. VDA, as I mentioned, has 3 groups. The manufacturers, the group 2 is for trailer bodies and buses, and the big group of automotive suppliers. As I have mentioned, this year we have the commercial vehicle show in Hanover, where you are warmly invited. It's going to be in late September, and hopefully without Corona, with a lot of international guests. Yeah, now I would like to give you some a little bit insight on the passenger car market as we see it. My colleagues from the forecast see it. So even with the deep crisis we have, which started especially in 2020 with Corona, we hope that the worldwide market is not going down too much this year. So with a slight increase, and this is important for the whole automotive industry, that the worldwide market is growing. Yeah, that even if in some regions we see a decline, that other regions grow. And of course, China, as you all know, has a very big footprint on the worldwide market, and has always helped to stabilize the whole automotive industry. And another important player are, of course, the United States, where we can also see a slight increase in the market this year. And of course, the big market of Europe, which has seen a decline, of course, since Corona. But we are also on hoping that we have a little market increase in this year. But of course, we still don't know how the war in Europe and the Ukraine will influence the whole market this year. Yeah, I have looked a little bit at the figures of the German-Korean automotive trade. And of course, this is, you have to if you consider the, for example, the free trade agreement we have with your country, of course, you have to look at the whole picture of Europe. But here we only see the figures of Germany and Korean trade. And as you know, German cars are very well known in Korea and very much appreciated. What we really appreciate as association. So you can see that within the trade with motor vehicles, we have a surplus, and but there are also, of course, exports from Korea to Europe, to Germany. But Korean manufacturers have also established a lot of plants in Europe. So if you look at the market share, it reflects that the Korean manufacturers have at this point of time a very high market share in Germany with 6.6%, which also comes from European plants and not only from Korea. But you see that the worldwide value chains, that they have changed a lot. You cannot really say the German automotive industry is only producing in Germany. It's the same for the Koreans. If you look at automotive parts, yeah, you can see that the trade has increased for both, yeah, for the German exporters and for the Korean exporters, which is very good. But I think there's also a lot of potential, yeah, for Korean suppliers to increase their exports to Germany, and I will come later. I will come back to this and maybe give some proposals how you could manage. Yeah, we have prepared some slides to show you what are the main reasons for the pressure on the supply chains we are having now. I think we all agree that COVID was a very, very hard outbreak, which we had to survive during the last 2 years. And we managed somehow, but there are a lot of shortages, which might not only come from COVID, but also have other reasons like the semiconductor shortage and many other shortages in the meanwhile, like with transport facilities and raw materials coming from other countries. So supply chains are under pressure, and this also gives a lot of chances to countries which could jump in, which could help to stabilize international production. And I think it would be a win-win if we could share information, what is needed, what does Korea need, what does Germany need, and there we could fill maybe the gaps. Here in this slide, you can see that we have much more orders than we can produce. Yeah, this is to summarize this slide. Yeah, we could the order situation. We could say it's good, but we cannot produce, we cannot deliver, which is really a very difficult situation. If you look at the registrations, they are much below the level which we had in the last years. This dotted line is the average of the last year's registrations, monthly registrations, and we come here in 2022 with the red line much below our potential, which is a great challenge, especially also for the suppliers, which need to fill their production capabilities, and sometimes it's very difficult for them. A highlight, and I'm sure that my colleague will develop on this further later, is the e-mobility. After having the support also of our government, financial support to buy cars with a battery or battery driven, the share of e-mobility has risen a lot, and last year already we had more than a third, 26% of each car which was sold in Germany had was driven with e-mobility, and the current change is around 24%. Yeah, which is also very important to know for you is that the German automotive industry is a very international industry, and you can see here that the share of the German production, it's falling and falling. It's going down. I have mentioned the reasons, but it's also a general trend that the foreign production abroad was rising during the last years. Yeah. When I started at BDA, the German production market was the most important, and now it's abroad. And it's not only China, it's also the United States and other Asian countries, Latin America, and of course other European countries. So if you're looking for partners in the German automotive industry, you can also look at the many production plans abroad. And here you can see that not only the manufacturers, but also our suppliers have altogether more than 2,500 production sites outside Germany, of course, also in Korea, but also in many other countries. And we are just trying to look a little bit deeper at Africa, but this takes a long time, and but finally Africa and India, also these countries will develop their industry, and we want to be a part of this. Yeah, the next topic I would like to highlight very short is the digital and green transformation, which requires a lot of changes in our industry. And as you know, Germany is not alone. A lot of the laws come from Brussels, and in Brussels we have the so-called Fit for 55 package, where we see a lot of regulations which are important for our industry. And the main regulations, of course, are the CO2 emission standards, which lead into an electric world, finally. Yeah, I have to mention that BDA is requiring always technical neutrality. So we want to also look at other techniques, because we think that the main goal is to reduce carbon and to come out in a carbon-free world. Another important issue from the point of international trade is, of course, the so-called carbon border adjustment mechanism. And this is something where I'm pretty sure that Korea is also looking at, because we want, our European Commission wants to egalize the carbon in some products and invent somehow a mechanism. Yeah, if a product has more carbon than Europe regulations would allow, you would somehow have to pay like a tariff if you want to import this product. It will be mainly for some raw materials at the beginning, which are very carbon intensive. But yeah, to be honest, VDA has always looked a little bit critical to this, because we think that trade should be free and not too complicated, and we could maybe face some counter actions. So it's a mechanism where everybody has to be very careful that we do not have trade distortions at the end. But it's also important that you, as a Korean supplier, look at these rules which come from Europe. Yeah, these are the sales of electric passenger cars. I think my colleague will later develop on this, but it's very impressive. A large ramp up also on a worldwide basis. And of course, China again plays a very important role for e-mobility. Here we have some from our colleagues, some statistics which also show that the Chinese and European e-mobility markets dominate the worldwide e-market. You also know that the United States also want to support e-mobility, and they have proposed a law which would discriminate somehow against imports and companies which do not have a US union. So I think also Korea has joined a common letter to the US government that we want to have a free market, yeah. And I think this is very important, as in Germany, we also support imports. It doesn't matter if it's a German car or a Korean car, so everybody is welcome. Yeah, last point are the unfortunate latest war aggressions, where we see, of course, several restrictions which have to come naturally. We also have a lot of actions by individual companies, VDA members, which voluntarily gave up trading and producing in Russia. So with this sanctions, we really hope to stop the war, and we hope that this will work, because it's really not something we want to go on now for the next month. And you know that there are already next steps, new sanctions, and of course we are supporting them and complying with them. Sometimes it's a little bit of a challenge, because you really have to look at the law. There are very complicated rules, but we have to adapt this. This is for sure. Yeah, here we also see that, as I have mentioned before, that the war in the Ukraine also led to some shortages in industries. So with wire harness and neon gas, and yeah, of course, you are invited from Korea also to support with this shortages if possible. And finally, we really hope that we can build up after the war all this production linkages. But at this point of time, of course, it's very difficult. Yeah, as I have mentioned, we are producing all over the world, and now this big country has to be left out, which is, Russia. Our engagement in Russia was not very high before the war, but still, of course, it existed. And yeah, we hope that someday this will all come back. Yes, I come now to the end of my presentation. I would like to highlight some of the fields of cooperation where I think we could work, and we are working together already. We have our free trade agreement, which has dismantled tariffs and non-tariff barriers. And I'm sure you know this. It has very complicated rules of origin, but this is, yeah, the other side of free trade. You need the rules of origins, and we always try to support also our members to fulfill them. And if you have questions, you can always also ask VDA. And we also have some institutional cooperation between the European Commission and Korea, and they are still going on the discussions on further harmonization of international standards and regulations. And I think this is very important, and I'm very happy that this cooperation goes on. Yeah, here is a last slide. If you see the imports of parts and engines to Germany, I have mentioned before that Korea, that there's a lot of potential, and I really hope that we can increase this imports from Korea. And yeah, I'm very happy if you also have a look at our cooperation platform, where as a supplier you can even register and look for partners in the German automotive industry, and also get in contact with other companies, potential customers. Please visit our platform, and of course, if you have any question, you can always contact me and my colleagues. Yeah, thank you very much, and I'm very happy to answer your questions now.
Thank you very much, Ms. Munz, for this very interesting presentation. Also, thank you very much for the insight with focus on the current issues like the Ukraine or COVID, and also for the additional information on how the VDA can support companies in the automotive sector. We will now be taking questions for Ms. Munz's presentation. As mentioned, you can leave your questions in the chatting. I think we might be only able to answer one question now because we started a little bit later, but feel free to leave your questions in the chatting, and we will collect them and send them to our presenters, so you can also get them answered via email.
I can see in the chat there are 2 or 3 things in Korean I cannot read, and
right.
And the question,
one question in Korean, which I will read in Korean, so our interpreters will translate for everyone into English. So I will read the question in Korean. 우크라이나 전쟁으로 인해 자동차 산업도 중견의 업체들에게 요구하던 글로벌라이제이션에서 유럽, 미국, 중국, 러시아 등으로 시장이 블록화되면서 로컬라이제이션에서 의존하게 될 가능성이 높아질지요.
I might not understood the whole question, but if I summarize, it was a question if we see a trend of localization instead of globalization. Is it right? If this was the question, I can answer. Okay, great. I would say we see both. I think Corona and now the current war has shown the dependencies, which can be a very big challenge for the whole industry. But at the same time, we believe that without international trade and international value chains, we cannot live anymore. Yeah, and it also gives peace, to work together. So we will see both. We will have to look very, very sharp to and very close to the things we really need, and we will try to also produce them by ourselves and or to diversify so that we are not so dependent. But at the same time, our members, at least we will try, and we really hope that the framework will make it possible, to have this international cooperation ongoing, because otherwise we see a separated world, and we do not want this. We want to have friendship with as many countries as possible in a good manner.
Thank you very much, Ms. Munz. I think in regards of time, we should move on to the next presentation. I would summarize the other questions that we got and send it to you via email so you can answer it, and then we can forward it if that would be okay. I would also,
thank you.
Thank you so much. I would also like to point out a few comments that we got in our chat also during the presentation. The first thing is that in our Korean invitations, we still had 5 presentations, including Mr. Nachi from Hyundai. Unfortunately, schedule-wise, Mr. Nachi's presentation will be moved to the second half of 2022 and not today. And the second comment that we got is whether we will make this presentation public. And yes, we are recording now and will upload the whole webinar onto our YouTube channel. I would once again thank Ms. Munz for her presentation, and I would like to move on to the second presentation of the day, which will be conducted by Mr. Frank Müller from the BEM, the German Federal Association for E-Mobility. Mr. Frank Müller was an e-mobility consultant for almost 20 years and is currently the director of the BEM. He will give us an insight on the general German EV market, charging infrastructure for EVs in Germany, and possible cooperations between Korean manufacturers and German buyers. Mr. Müller, you are welcome to start your presentation now.
Okay. Can you see the presentation? Yes. Okay. I think the presentation is online and everyone can see it. First of all, thanks a lot, Dina Zlatina, that we are able to, here in this presentation, we are able to present the BEM. Also, thank you for Angela Munz to have a wonderful start and a great presentation also about the actual happenings, the news with the war and Corona. Just from my side, quickly, just for you to imagine, in Korea, there's a big war going on 600 kilometers away from Berlin. Feels very different. As you know, we didn't have any wars in Western, mostly in Europe, for many years besides Serbia, but this kind of war is really shocking us. It's very close. We have a lot of refugees here in Berlin and Germany. We of course, we start to have a different situation with inflation, a little bit of food shortage, but I think the most crazy part is that we have a war so close and that this war is getting in a very, very unhuman stage. I just remember the pictures which came out yesterday. It's a real shock, and it sometimes gives us a situation where we have to sit back and can't not really work normally, because this is a war which also doesn't seem to end very soon. I don't know what kind of plans Mr. the dictator Putin has, but it doesn't look very good right now. So, maybe for you Koreans to understand, it's a very different situation for us today to have a war such close, and it's not far away from Berlin, the capital of Germany. That is, a very scary situation. But what will happen out of this situation is that e-mobility, and very important for us also, the renewables will come a lot faster than even planned. Just for you to understand, we will change in Germany our whole energy grid, energy power system towards 80% of renewables in 2030. Right now, we are around 40% are renewables in our grid, and we will change it towards 80% in 2030. So this is going to go really fast. And in 2035, we will be at 100% renewables. That's the plans of the new German government. And that means big changes, big shifts towards a more climate neutral industry, and of course, a very different way of mobility. Looking at a new mobility, we will probably have about 10 million electric cars by 2030, and there might be a slot in roughly 2035 where combustion cars are not going to be sold anymore. It's not law yet, but it looks like the new German government goes into this direction. So what we're going to see is a disruption of combustion cars, which is amazingly fast. The best example is here, right in Berlin, or in the outskirts of Berlin. Maybe you have heard the new Gigafactory from Tesla was just opened a couple of days ago. And this factory was planned and built in only 2 years. And they will produce in roughly a year or 1.5 years, 500,000 electric cars, Teslas, 500,000. And we are always kind of shocked in which speed this goes on. Also, as you might see already at Ms. Mahn's presentation, we have a market share at this point of 25% of new cars are electric cars, plug-in hybrids and battery electric cars. And we also see a strong growing of the charging infrastructure in Germany. The German government just supported and funded private charging infrastructure. And we will see 500,000 new wall boxes all over Germany in private houses or small companies, roughly by the end of this year. So therefore, we see an immense growing of the charging infrastructure in Germany right now. And again, you can also see, even here in Berlin, quite a lot of electric cars on the street. Myself, I'm happy driving a Kia Niro EV. I love Korean technology, special, of course, electric cars from Korea. They have a good mindset. People like these cars. They have cars which are not so pricey and are easily used by families. As we have at this point, most of the German car producers produce quite expensive and big electric cars, like SUVs, and therefore it's a good point that the Kia and Hyundai are producing mid-size cars for a reasonable price, even for family use. The very important outlook for us is to combine the electric cars with the grid system. This is highly important because the grid system, as I just said, will depend a lot more on renewables in the nearby future, and therefore it needs some storages. And this storage needs to come either from big battery packs all around the country, but also from electric vehicles. So our clear focus is to connect the electric cars in the nearby future with the grid system. First of all, that they will only charge when there's a lot of energy coming in the grid from renewables. And second, that's a more important part, that they can give us energy towards the grid, therefore calling vehicle to grid systems. And we need this technology for implementing all the renewable energy. So the electric car, the battery-driven car will be very important for a shift towards 100% of renewables in Germany.
Mr. Müller, I'm sorry for, perfect. Okay, thank you very much. I wanted to mention to, move the slides to your talk. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Sorry, I didn't change. So just a quickly outlook for our association. We are a fast-growing association. Right now, we have over 450 members. We have very small startups up to big companies in our association. Very important for us is that we have a wide range of companies. There are companies from the automotive industry, supply industry, charging infrastructure, and of course, energy power supplier who are members of our association. So we combine not only the electric cars, also electric ships, electric planes, and electric bikes together with the grid system and the power supply. So that's a little bit different to the VDA, which is more a car association, which is focused on cars. We are focused on the whole range of e-mobility right now. Therefore, just looking at the situation in Germany right now, we have roughly 40 million cars in Germany, which will be, of course, a big task to shift them towards electric vehicles. We will see in the nearby future probably a reduction of the amount of the cars which are driving in Germany, because there will be a lot more sharing systems which are highly which people support a lot, like cities like Berlin, Hamburg, Munich. You see already many car sharing system for cars here in Berlin. It's roughly 5 or 6 companies who supply the city with sharing systems, and also we have e-scooter system sharing systems and e-bike sharing systems. And on the long run, we don't see that Germany will have 40 million cars. It will be probably less cars, because many more cars will be part of a sharing system. Very important to look at how private cars are used. Most of the time, the private cars are parked 21 hours, so they're not in use. And therefore, at this time, we can use the battery as a storage system for the power supplier, because that will also make money for the driver. So he can rent his battery towards the local power supplier and makes money out of his battery. Very important also to understand is we don't have such a big problem of range of electric cars, because in Germany, about 80% of the daily routes are only 50 kilometers. Pretty much every electric car today can have has a range over 50 kilometers. Right now, we are around in an average around 250 to 300 kilometers for new electric cars which are on the market in Germany. So the daily routes what we have in Germany are easily being solved with electric car. And also, as I just mentioned, there are many more private charging points in Germany, so people can charge their car at home or even at the work. The German government is funding electric vehicles on a high range right now. First of all, the taxation of electric cars at this point for 5 years is 0%. And very important, there is a big funding for the German government, which is about 6,000 euros for a new electric car if it's below 40,000 euros price. And there's additional 3,000 euros funding or supporting from the auto producer. We just would like to have a quick look at the international market for funding electric vehicles. As we have a look right in the world, there's a strong funding, of course, in Norway, in France, in the US, especially in California. So at this point, it's very important to have these fundings, and they will continue for quite a while. But what's even more important from our side, that we're going to see, as I mentioned already, many countries which are going to forbid car sales for combustion cars, ICE cars. Ireland, for example, will start by 2030. Norway will start by 2025. As I said, Germany maybe by 2035. Sweden, Netherlands will also stop the car sales for combustion cars at 2030. So we will see a strong decrease of car sales for consumption cars and a strong increase of electric cars, because, as I said, the sales for combustion cars will end soon in many countries in Europe. This is a quick outlook where we're going to see the rise of electric vehicles until 2040. What's very important for us at this point also to see that we will have an increase sales of buses and coaches. This is a strong market which is highly growing. The car market, of course, is increasing strongly too. I guess we will see at medium-duty vehicles an increase by the next 2 or 5 years, a strong increase going around 5 to 10%. And then heavy-duty vehicles probably will come to the market after 2025. From our side, what's highly important to look at is the technology. Technology will shift, will change, and therefore we see a wonderful example from Volkswagen, which built the so-called MEB platform, which is a setup platform which can be provided by different battery systems. Right now, they have 3 battery systems. This platform is used in the whole Volkswagen company, like Audi uses this, Seat, Skoda uses the same platform, so they can build a high number of these MEB platforms, and they also start to sell these platforms like to Ford. And I'm sure they will start to sell it to many other smaller auto producers around the world, so they can build their own vehicle on this platform. At this point, this platform is available for a price around 18,000. So the auto producer who buys this platform can build his own vehicle on this and can use this platform. What's also important for us to see that we are not seeing any future for plug-in hybrids and mild hybrids. These kind of cars will disappear. We will guess in a time period of 5 years. because right now, even with the German government, there's not a strong support for them to fund them anymore. Until now, they have a funding of 4,500 euros. But we, as the German Association for E-Mobility, we don't see a clear focus on a new green mobility or climate or CO2-free mobility, because these plug-in hybrids are mostly not really used a lot as an electric vehicle. They're not being charged. And then in the end, it's only 30 to 40 kilometers which they can run. So this is not a high range. And in the end, they're not really doing anything for a reduction of CO2 emission. Therefore, yes, the German market is highly active for shifting towards electromobility. And I think what's highly interesting for Korean partners is either to supply the German auto producer with either batteries, which is a big issue, because the German industry just doesn't want to be only dependent on China. Of course, there are already many companies supplying us the German market, but batteries is a big issue in the German industry for electromobility, and also more efficient parts for the electric vehicle. Either it's an air conditioner, a heater, it's recuperation, it's a BMS system, and so on. So all these technical parts which an electric car needs need to be a lot more efficient, and therefore the German market needs high-tech technology for the new electric vehicles. And on the mid-range run, it's highly important also for the German market to supply us with software, hardware for connecting the electric vehicle with the grid system. Therefore, the German market also needs a lot technology from, special of course, from Korea to do this shift. Yes, from my side, that's it. I don't want to accelerate my speech so much, and I'm looking forward to answer your questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Müller.
So how many questions should I answer, and maybe which one?
I think we got in 2 questions, so I will just read out the first one in English, and you can answer directly. So the first question would be, what is the market status of home charging stations through ESS, which is energy storage system, related to electric vehicle charging, and what is the future direction?
So at this point, we see in the market mostly AC chargers, which are in the range of 11 or 22 kilowatts. This is about 80% of the markets are AC charger, and roughly 20% of the market are DC chargers. Most of the DC chargers at this point are chargers up to 50 kilowatts, but we see now a strong market on the high power chargers, which go in Germany go up to 250, even sometimes 300 kilowatts charging possibility. This market is growing very fast. And it's, of course, these high power chargers are mainly implemented on the highways. And we are seeing pretty much every gasoline station and restaurant on highways will have charging systems by the end of 2023.
Thank you very much. I think we can take a second question, which again, I'm going to be reading out in English. for the 2022-2023 compact SUV, what's the power level of traction motor in each rear and front respectively? Do they keep 400 voltage range or up to 800 voltage? Switch to SiC or keep IGBT?
Yes, we are seeing right now a strong shift towards 800 volts. Because as we know, with 800 volts, fast charging is a lot easier possible. Therefore Volkswagen and Audi, of course, are working on new systems which implement 800 volts and will be the future for a new way of charging. And a charging system which goes above 250 kilowatts. Therefore, they will be, of course, stronger with the competitor Tesla. At this point, Tesla's fastest charging power is 250, and Audi and Porsche want to go up to 350 kilowatts. And this is only possible and reachable through 800 volts technology.
Thank you very much, Mr. Müller. I think it was a very interesting presentation on current trends in e-mobility in the German market. And I think if there are any more questions from our audience, they can either, again, send them to us so we can forward them to you, or just direct them directly to you so you can answer them via email. Once again, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
With that, I would like to move to the third presentation for the day, which will be conducted by Mr. Mark Schmittem. Mr. Mark from the NOW GmbH, the National Organization Hydrogen and Fuel Cell Technology. Mr. Schmittem has worked as a research fellow for the EU-Japan Center for Industrial Cooperation and as an analyst for the KPMG. He is now the program manager for international cooperation at NOW GmbH. Mr. Schmittem will present on e-mobility and H2 applications and infrastructure and commercial vehicles. Mr. Schmittem, you are welcome to start your presentation now.
Yeah, thank you very much for your kind introduction. So I will just share my screen and then we will start. So I think you should be able to see the presentation right now. So the topic again is climate-friendly applications in commercial vehicles and infrastructure in Germany. And this is actually very important, and I will start with this because in the earlier presentations, we also saw some outlook on the broader international level, on the European level, but the NOW is very much focused on the domestic German market. So my speech will be strongly focused on Germany. So we will start with a brief introduction, then we will continue with commercial vehicles, then a small part on e-mobility. So a lot of this has already been covered, so maybe I will skip through this.
Mr. Schmittem, I'm sorry, yeah. 1 second. We cannot see your presentation yet.
You cannot see it, okay.
Yes, can you maybe share once again?
Yeah, I will try it again, right, of course. So can you see it now?
Not yet, no.
Okay.
Okay, now we can see it. Thank you so much.
Okay, great. Okay, so yeah, so I already started my introduction, but anyway, so the first part is my introduction into the company where I'm working for. The second part will be about support policies for commercial vehicles. Then we will switch over to the e-mobility market in Germany. And my focus will actually be more on the support side from the government on the whole affair, especially also on charging infrastructure. And the last part will be the hydrogen ecosystem in Germany and also the role hydrogen plays in mobility. So let me begin with the introduction. So actually, the NOW was already formed in 2008 to execute the so-called National Innovation Program, Hydrogen and Fuel Cell Technology, that was started in 2006 and is now prolonged until 2026. So it's running for around 20 years, and after 2026 we will see how it continues, but it's a long-running program, and the NOW is also a well-established organization, and from this start as a pure hydrogen play, it has branched out now into many other fields, as you can see here: electromobility on site, charging infrastructure, also promotion of commercial vehicles with alternative drivetrain, which will be a topic today, and also some international activities like an export initiative on environmental technologies and fuel cell applications especially, and also an engagement in mission innovation to foster a global hydrogen environment. The core of the NOW is, as I said before, is the National Innovation Program for Hydrogen and Fuel Cell Technology, and it's actually a little bit complicated and complex. So just to give you a brief impression how this is actually working is that the Federal Transport Ministry has the oversight and has a strategic lead on the program, and the execution is then dealt with by the NOW, so my company, and the project management Jülich, so the PTJ, that's actually the organization that's dealing with the actual applications for support money and so on. So it's rather complicated, and also what should be mentioned is that the NIP has two phases or sections. One is the R&D phase, and the second one is the market activation phase. And actually, the first 10 years of the program, so from 2006 to 2016, the focus was almost entirely on research and development to set the basis for hydrogen applications in mobility. And now the second phase of the NIP is more focusing on market activation and implementation of the developed technologies. What is also important is that in 2020 there was a huge change in hydrogen policy in Germany, because, as I mentioned before, since 2006 we had like a program in mobility, but this was more or less that was what was going on in Germany at the time. But in 2020, with more interest in hydrogen and also in broader applications of hydrogen, for example, also in industrial applications, and also the generation of hydrogen via electrolyzers and so on, it was decided to draw up wholesale national hydrogen strategy, and this strategy is actually combining existing measures and programs like the NIP with new and planned activities like in industrial usage and in other fields of application. As you can see here, the total budget that is associated with the current strategy is 9 billion euros, and it's really an overarching strategy. So it's not just focusing on mobility or on industrial applications or something, but it's trying to focus on everything. So starting with mobility, going over to infrastructure, research and development, and everything you can think of. And also, of course, what is important always when you consider Germany is that Germany is embedded into the EU system and into the broader European context, and that's also part of the hydrogen strategy. That it's not just even though it is a national hydrogen strategy, it's not purely domestic, but it also has some components, and it's also aware of the broader international scheme and things. What's important to mention here is that actually this 2020 strategy will be reviewed this year. So that's at least it's the current state of plans in the in the Ministry for the Economy, and so maybe we will see some changes here in the future, but this is the status quo and the current situation. And similar to the NIP, which I mentioned before, where we have these two phases, like 10 years for R&D and 10 years for market activation, we see a similar approach here for the national hydrogen strategy. In 2020, it was started, and up to next year, there's the first phase with laying the groundwork for everything, and the second phase, 7 years planned up until now, until 2030, we will see then the market implementation phase. Yeah, and of course, NOW is hugely involved in this hydrogen strategy on many levels, and it's actually also leading the hydrogen coordination office where everything comes together. We also see, of course, that there's a huge engagement of different industry partners, and of course also of the government. It's not just the Ministry of Transportation, which is of course focusing on mobility, or the Ministry of the Economy, which is more focusing on industrial applications, but there's also an interest from the Ministry for Science and Technology, the Ministry of International Cooperation, and also the Ministry for the Environment. So there are many stakeholders that are involved in this process. This was already mentioned in one of the earlier speeches. So of course, Europe is, or Germany is depending on Europe and on the European legislation, and especially important is of course the Fit for 55 package, and there are many parts that are also important for the mobility system. So that were just some few words on my organization. Now I will continue with the commercial vehicles. So actually, the challenge, of course, is that Germany has committed itself to become carbon neutral by 2045. So that's not that much time anymore. It's just 23 years from now on. And what you see here is that in the transport sector, the emissions haven't really come down that much so far. So there's a lot of work to do, and that shows why it's so important to roll out e-mobility, and also to also allow applications of hydrogen in mobility and everything else, because everything is needed really to get to the ultimate goal of carbon neutrality in 2045. Here you can see that actually right now commercial vehicles make up around 35% of the CO2 emissions in the transport sector. So it's a rather large part, and especially heavy duty vehicles with more than 40 tons of weight, they make up the largest part. And this is a huge problem, because as we have seen in the earlier speech by Mr. Müller, there are not really so many applications right now on the market that can help to abate CO2 emissions in the heavy duty commercial vehicle space. So there's a lot to do, and again, time is running, and we really need to focus on ways to manage this and to abate the CO2 emissions. One step to do that was attempted with the Climate Protection Program 2030, where we also see some rules and measures for the commercial vehicles. For example, it's planned to electrify about 50% of the city buses in Germany, which would amount to around 2,500 buses per year that would be newly acquired, and these 2,500 buses, of course, would need an alternative drivetrain. The second thing is commercial vehicles. The actual targets are not as high as for the buses, because, as I said before, there are still some problems to actually bring these technologies on the road. But of course, that's definitely the plan to foster that, and to encourage producers with various schemes, not just with subsidies, but also by increasing the cost of the conventional technologies, by truck tolls that are coupled with CO2 emissions, and also surcharges. Yes, I already covered most of this, so I will just skip that. But what you can see here again is that 1/3 of the commercial vehicles basically should be electric or electricity based by 2030. So that's also a rather steep goal, but we will come later to the actual numbers, and we have also heard some projections in the earlier speeches. So so Germany is getting there, but it's still a challenge. Here's the roadmap for decarbonization envisioned by the Transportation Ministry. So what you can see here is that in 2022, we are mostly still in the R&D phase and in the very early stage of the ramp up, but it will definitely continue and accelerate. And there's also in the maybe in 2 to 4 years, there's also a window of opportunity where we can think about whether additional support programs are needed or whether the current support schemes are sufficient, and also how demand and supply actually develops now that in around 4 years that the technologies have matured more than at the current stage. Here just some information on the current funding guidelines that are existing for commercial vehicles. Here's the funding guideline for climate-friendly commercial vehicles. It started in last year actually, and it's running to 2024. It has a volume of 1 to 1.6 billion euros, and it's actually technology neutral. So it's not necessary that you procure a battery electric truck or something like this, but you can also procure fuel cell trucks or even hybrid trucks in some applications. And what this guideline is funding is actually the additional costs for these vehicles in comparison to conventional technologies. Here's the same for buses. It's basically identical, but the volume is a little bit lower, but other than that. And here, what's also interesting is that here you can also have support for biogas fired buses. This is also interesting. And of course, the battery trolley system that's also explored in some municipalities in Germany, but the most focus is actually on battery driven, on battery buses and on fuel cell buses actually. And here are some impressions how this actually looks on the road. So we can already see this in various municipalities. So for example, here in the upper left corner, you can see an example here from Berlin, where we can already see many battery electric buses on the road. Now to the third part of my presentation, e-mobility and the current status. So we already heard about some projections and also developments, but I will just give you a short overview of the current status again. Why is e-mobility so important, and also what is the challenge associated with e-mobility? That's of course that on the one hand we need to think about acceptance. So we had the range issue already discussed a little bit. So when it comes like to passenger cars, it's as you have heard before, it's maybe not so much of a problem because they are actually not used for long ranges. But when you think about trucks, especially like intercontinental transportation, trucks running, let's say from Romania to Spain or something like this, and of course range will be an issue, and also we need to think about the charging behavior. How are the consumers actually using the charging infrastructure? Are they most relying on their home stations, or are they also using the public system? And also how much are they willing to pay, especially now, because along with the Russian-Ukraine crisis, and also before, actually since the autumn last year, we saw a huge increase in electricity price as well. So this is also maybe leading to some problems, and this is something to consider. And of course, the ultimate goal, as I said before, is of course to reduce the dependency on fossil fuels and become carbon neutral. Yeah, and for that we need basically everything. We need what was already mentioned. We need fleet operators and car sharing. We need energy companies to supply the electricity. We need, of course, we need to consider the end users, who is actually using that in the end. And we also need the operators of the charging system and the supporting regulation. Here you can see the number of passenger vehicles registered in Germany. And as you can see, it's mostly hybrids and battery electric vehicles. Fuel cell vehicles doesn't play a significant role right now. Here's the situation for buses. Here it's interesting that you can actually see a significant, or at least a countable, visible number. 1,046 in March. It was around 1,500 buses on the road, and this is actually also an interesting point that at the moment we see like some divergent trends in the different municipalities in Germany. So some municipalities, they are strongly going to an all-electric route when it comes to buses. So for example, in Berlin, here in Berlin, we see that the local transportation company, it's basically focusing only on electric buses, but in other municipalities, for example, the city of Essen in North Rhine-Westphalia, they plan to only use fuel cell buses. So that's still like, so even though, of course, the battery electric buses, they are dominating definitely when it comes to the numbers, 94%. But when it comes to local applications, there's still some, it seems that there are some opportunities also for fuel cell powered buses. Last but not least, the situation for trucks. Here we see that battery electric trucks are accounting for the largest part of the market, and the other two types, plug-in hybrids and fuel cell vehicles, they don't play a large role. Here we continue with the charging system. So we already heard in the earlier presentation by Mr. Müller that there's a growing interest in private charging infrastructure. That's of course the case, but what we should not forget is also that Germany also need like a domestic fast charging system that is available to everyone, especially also in the rural and less developed parts of the country. So of course you see a huge interest also by private companies to get up a charging system in the large communities like Berlin, Munich, and so on. But in order to also set up a system in as I said, the rural parts of the country and the less developed part, it was decided to set up a tender for a domestic fast charging network, and this is now in the process of being implemented. Okay, and the next question is actually, because so far the charging infrastructure debate and also the investment in fast charging infrastructure is mostly focusing on charging infrastructure for private cars. But if we want to also support trucks that are running on electric drive systems, then of course we also need a charging system for this sector, and this is currently under considerations how such a system can look like and where these charging stations should be built. So what you can see on the map, that's just a draft, but you can see that the current planning is to closely follow the highway motorways in Germany, basically. Okay, so I will skip the funding guideline just to don't make this presentation too long, but last but not least, a few words on the hydrogen ecosystem in Germany and how this supports the rollout of hydrogen-powered cars and also everything else. So this, what should be mentioned is that this part is purely focused on hydrogen. So the other parts, they had like some contents were related to hydrogen, some contents were related to e-mobility, but this is purely hydrogen. And here you see some numbers, how this is actually looking like right now in Germany. So we have 91 hydrogen refueling stations currently in operation. We have around 405 funded projects and around 3,000 funded vehicles, but this is just the number of funded vehicles. It's not the number of vehicles that you can see on the road. So that's just around 1,500, so it's much less. And this is also maybe a first point how we can bring in the Korean side, because due to the capabilities of the Korean manufacturers, of course, it's interesting to see whether they can bring their cars here also on the and also heavy commercial vehicles on the market to to bring these number of vehicles from funded to a higher number of vehicles actually on the road. And similar to the charging infrastructure for the electric vehicles, we also see investment into a domestic hydrogen refueling station system. And this is again depending on the ramp up. So if we see like a huge demand, especially maybe on the commercial side for commercial vehicles, then this numbers that are currently planned can also increase. So this is not set 100% set in stone or something like this. This is just the current status of planning, and it might increase if a higher demand is foreseeable. Yeah, and here you can see how it looks like on the map. Last but not least, what I also want to mention is the so-called Highland program. It's a challenge to establish regional structures for hydrogen. And the idea is to create visibility and awareness for hydrogen and how it can play a role in creating a climate-friendly mobility system. It's also envisioned to help to connect regions and to connect partners, bring together stakeholders, and also foster an exchange of best practices in the different regions. And it is separated into three categories. So we have high starters that are basically regions or municipalities that want to begin to look into this issue of hydrogen and how they can use that for their own local problems and challenges. And basically what they are doing there is they make some studies and concepts for how they can use hydrogen in the future. The next phase, or the second category, is high experts that are actually places where hydrogen is already established as a technology, and here we can see like in-depth planning and how this can roll out in the future, and how this can actually be brought on the road, and what kind of applications of hydrogen are actually possible and useful. And the last category is a high performer. That are only 3 regions right now, and they actually also get CapEx funding for actually implementing some of the measures that were established during the planning and concept phase. And yeah, last but not least, that's my last slide. What is interesting here is if you have a look at the table, is that the expected demand in the high expert regions until 2025 it's actually very, very large, especially also in the, and that again, that's demand for hydrogen vehicles. It's not demand for electric vehicles, and but it's still very high, and especially also in the commercial space, like industrial trucks around 400, also buses around 300, and trucks even around 800 trucks that are envisioned to be needed until 2025. And as it is mentioned here in the caption, actually the demand is, the envisioned demand at least, is so large that it exceeds the market availability. So that will be very interesting to see how this plays out, and if we see more supply in the future. So that wraps up my presentation, and I'm happy to take your questions and answer everything.
Thank you very much, Mr. Schmitten, for this very interesting presentation. Also, in regards to current implementation and policy regarding e-mobility in Germany. Thank you very much. I think we have time for one question that came in during the presentation. And I will read out the question in English. It's on the screen now. If you look at the European hydrogen market, it seems mostly concentrated on commercial vehicles. What does the future of the hydrogen-based passenger car market look like?
Yeah, I think that's a very, very interesting and important question. So, yeah, I think it's, and also it's maybe difficult to answer, because in the past there was the vision that you would see both sides, so the commercial side and also the passenger car side. But right now, I think the yeah, as you mentioned in the question as well, it is the situation has changed a little bit because especially in Germany and also in many other at least in some other European countries, we see that there's a commitment for green hydrogen. And green hydrogen at the moment is more expensive than conventional hydrogen. And also the whole infrastructure and the whole production system for green hydrogen still needs to be set up. That means that for the foreseeable future, at least green hydrogen will be a scarce good. And if it's a scarce good and not available in too large quantities, then of course we need to ask the question, where do we want to use the limited supply of green hydrogen? And the current status of the discussion, at least in Germany, and I believe also in other European countries, is that if hydrogen remains scarce, then it's more useful in so-called hard-to-abate areas of the industry, or of the economy. So that would be, of course, industrial applications like in steel, cement industry, and so on. But it would, when it comes to mobility, it would maybe be the commercial vehicle space, because that, as I showed before, there are a lot of unabated emissions in Germany right now. And if we want to become carbon neutral by 2045, we need to deal with that somehow. And that's maybe the answer to your question, that just because, or due to the limited availability of hydrogen at the moment, it's more interesting in commercial vehicles. But at the other hand, of course, what we also need to consider is that when it comes to the actual availability of car models or automobiles, then we have, of course, at least we have some cars from Hyundai and also from Toyota, the Mirai and so on. But the availability of commercial vehicles is much lower at the moment. So that's also a mismatch at this point, at least. But yeah, we will need to see how this plays out in the future, and if we can deal with this mismatch.
Thank you very much, Mr. Schmidtham. I think every other question time-wise can be answered by email. And thank you very much again for your very interesting presentation. And I would like to move on and introduce our last, but definitely not least presenter for the day, Mr. Ung Chae Chong. Mr. Chong has worked as a project engineer and project director at Volkswagen and Kikad AG, and is currently the CEO of AP Global. Mr. Chong will give us a general overview, including supply chains and OEM battery cell internalization for eco-friendly vehicles. As a small note, Mr. Chong will be holding his presentation in Korean with English translations, so there is no need to change any interpretation settings. Mr. Chong, you are welcome to start your presentation.
안녕하십니까. AP글로벌의 정웅재라고 합니다. 오늘 제가 약 20분 동안 말씀드릴
One second, we are having a small technical difficulty. Our IT team is fixing it right now.
안녕하십니까. AP글로벌의 정웅재라고 합니다. 오늘 제가 약 20분 동안 말씀드릴 내용은요, 2022년 올해 유럽 자동차 시장 관련돼서 간단하게 좀 설명을 드리도록 하겠습니다. 오늘 말씀드릴 아젠다는 세 가지인데요. 첫 번째는 최근 많이 이슈가 되고 있는 자동차 부품 수급 이슈, 두 번째는 독일 OEM들이 최근에 이제 한 2, 3년 된 이슈긴 한데 최근까지 배터리 셀 내재화를 어떤 형태로 좀 하고 있는지, 그리고 향후의 자동차, 전기차 생산 계획 관련돼서 간단하게 설명을 드리고요. 마지막으로 최근 독일 거래선들이 친환경차 관련돼서 소싱을 하고 있는 부품군들, 그리고 국내 업체들이 어떤 형태로 좀 대응을 해야 되는지, 이렇게 마지막으로 말씀을 드리도록 하겠습니다. 자, 첫 번째 그 부품 수급 이슈 관련돼서 간단하게 OEM별로 티어 1별로 간단하게 좀 요약을 해드릴 텐데요. 그 왼쪽에 보시면 그 폴크스바겐, 아우디, 스코다 해서 이제 세 개 메이저 모델을 폴크스바겐 그룹의 세 개 메이저 모델을 이렇게 보실 수 있는데 일단 첫 번째로 작년 대비해서 어느 정도 생산량이 되었는지 그리고 두 번째로는 최근에 이제 반도체 이슈 관련돼서 쭉 진행이 되어 오고 있었는데 이 문제 말고도 러시아 우크라이나 사태를 통해서 어떤 문제들이 좀 생기고 있는지 관해서 간단하게 말씀드리겠습니다. 그 폴크스바겐 같은 경우는 2021년 작년에 한 890만 대 정도 판매를 했는데요. 2020년 대비 약 40만 대 정도 감소한 한 5% 정도 감소했다고 보시면 될 것 같고 이 중에서 특히 이제 중국 판매량이 많이 좀 감소를 했다고 합니다. 그래서 한 15% 정도 중국에서 판매가 많이 감소가 되었고 부품 수급 관련돼서는 그 반도체 이슈는 뭐 작년부터 해서 계속 여전히 모든 OEM이랑 티어 1에 영향이 가고 있는 테마고 최근에 이제 그런 러시아 사태 때문에 다양한 그 시스템에 이제 와이어 하니스 수급 이슈가 계속 좀 차질이 있는 것 같아요. 그래서 올해 이제 4월부터 폴크스바겐 그 볼스버그이라는 본사에서부터 이제 쉬프트를 조금씩 줄여 나갈 예정이라고 하고 있고 아우디는 2021년에 168만 대 정도 판매를 했습니다. 이 판매 대수가 2020년 대비 한 1% 정도 거의 2022년이랑 거의 동일한 수준으로 판매를 했다고 보시면 될 것 같고 아우디도 마찬가지로 이제 와이어 하니스 이슈 때문에 지금 독일 본사 잉골슈타트나 네카술름 같은 이 공장에 세 개 라인 중에 한 2개 정도 중단시킬 정도로 상당히 좀 영향이 좀 있는 것 같아요. 그리고 지금 최근에 이제 한 10,000여 명 정도 독일의 여러 공장에서 단축 근무를 진행을 하고 있다고 합니다. 스코다는 뭐 다른 모델에 비해서 조금 더 생산 영향이 좀 있었던 걸로 이렇게 나오는데 2021년에 1년 동안 87만 대 정도, 보통 일반적으로 한 100만 대 정도 생산을 하는데 87만 대 정도 판매를 했다고 보시면 될 것 같고 2020년 대비 한 13% 정도 감소한 수량이라고 보시면 될 것 같습니다. 그래서 오른쪽 도표를 보시면 최근에 이런 반도체 이슈나 와이어 하니스 이슈 때문에 차량 주문 후에 이제 대기 시간이 상당히 많이 길어지고 있는데 보통 폴크스바겐, 아우디, 스코다 이렇게 해서 이제 모델별로 대략 한 6개월에서 길게는 한 12개월 정도 지연이 되고 있고 다음 슬라이드에 좀 말씀을 드리겠지만 특정 차량들은 어떤 OEM들은 이제 더 이상 주문을 받지 않을 정도로 시스템을 좀 스탑을 시켜 놓을 정도로 조금 생산에 차질이 많이 있는 것 같아요. 그래서 모든 OEM들이 지금 반도체뿐만 아니고 이제 와이어 하니스도 한정된 수량으로 생산을 해야 되기 때문에 특정 전기차나 특정 내연기관 차량에 이제 좀 판매가 잘 되는 메이저 모델 중심으로 그 생산 계획을 좀 잡고 있다고 보시면 될 것 같습니다. BMW는 2021년에 250만 대 정도 판매를 했고 다른 독일 OEM 대비해서 다른 독일 OEM들은 조금 감소를 한 상황인데 BMW 같은 경우는 한 8% 정도 2020년 대비 좀 판매를 더 많이 했다고 보시면 될 것 같고요. 부품 수급 이슈는 똑같습니다. 근데 이제 BMW 같은 경우는 조금 더 다른 OEM에 비해서 와이어 하니스 이슈가 조금 더 커지는 것 같아요. 그래서 엔진 쪽이나 일렉트릭 파워트레인 쪽에 하니스 차질 때문에 그러니까 올해 상반기 생산에 상당히 좀 영향이 있을 것 같고 그리고 올 3월부터 벌써 이미 그 독일의 그 메이저 생산 공장인 뮌헨이나 딩골핑 등 이런 공장에서는 단축 근무를 지금 하고 있고 한 10,000여 명 정도가 일단 이런 부품 수급 때문에 생산에 영향을 받아서 단축 근무를 진행을 하고 있다고 보면 될 것 같고요. 오른쪽 도표를 보시면 마찬가지로 BMW 미니 쪽 이 전기차 주문 후에 대기 기간인데 평균적으로 한 7개월, 8개월 이상은 좋게 걸린다고 보시면 될 것 같습니다. 메세디스 벤츠 같은 경우도 2021년 250만 대를 판매를 했는데 2020년 대비 약 5% 정도 판매 감소를 보였다고 보시면 될 것 같고, 최근에 이래 다양한 반도체, 와이어 하니스 뭐 외에도 이제 여러 원소재, 로머티리얼 서플라이 체인 이슈가 좀 많이 화두가 되고 있어서 최근에 E 클래스나 G 클래스 같은 경우는 주문을 더 이상 받지 않는 상황이고, 그리고 다른 OEM과 마찬가지로 메이저 전기차 모델만 포커스를 해서 지금 생산을 하고 있다고 합니다. 그리고 부품 수급 영향 아래단에 한번 보시면 독일의 이제 브레멘 공장이나 라슈타트, 젠델핑은 이런 공장들이 이제 메이저 공장들인데요. 이런 공장에서 생산하고 있는 다양한 뭐 C 클래스나 E 클래스, A 클래스 이런 모델들의 생산이 시프트 다운 때문에 어느 정도 영향이 가고 있다고 보시면 될 것 같고, 각 공장별로 한 몇천 명씩 지금 단축 근무를 진행을 하고 있고, 거의 이게 지금 향후에 어떻게 될지, 전쟁이 어떻게 될지 이게 좀 명확하게 계획을 하기가 어렵기 때문에 거의 업체들이 거의 한 격주로 플랜을 계속 하고 있다고 보시면 될 것 같아요. 그래서 지금 비즈니스를 하고 계신 업체나 하지 않고 계신 업체나 이런 상황을 좀 아셔갖고, 지금 요 독일의 이제 거래선들도 똑같이 이런 그 향후의 계획을, 그러니까 장기적으로 이제 플랜을 할 수 없어서 거의 한 격주로 한 달 간격으로 이렇게 좀 플랜을 하고 있다고 보시면 될 것 같아요. 그래서 오른쪽 도표를 보시면 벤츠 같은 경우도 각 모델별로 대략 한 5개월, 9개월 이렇게 전기차 주문 후에 대기 기간이라고 나오는데, 사실은 이거보다 조금 더 길어지고 있다고 지금 뉴스에 많이 나오고 있는 상황이고요. 아까 말씀드린 대로 특정 모델들은 지금 더 이상 너무 이제 풀로 주문이 온 상태라서 더 이상 주문을 받지 않고 이런 상태라고 보시면 될 것 같아요. 그리고 독일 메이저 티어 1 업체들의 현황을 간단하게 좀 설명을 드리면, 컨티넨탈, 보쉬, ZF, 셰플러 이런 업체들이 사실 지난 한 2년, 3년 전부터 이런 전기차나 수소차 같은 친환경 차량들이 계속 메인스트림이 되면서 본인들이 가지고 있던 내연기관 사업권들에 대한 몸집을 계속 줄여가고 있는 상태예요. 그래서 공장도 유럽에 있는 공장뿐만 아니고 글로벌한 공장들을 많이 폐쇄도 하고 있고, 그리고 기존에 다음 버전으로 계속 개발을 하고 있던 이런 내연기관 관련된 어떤 제품들은 개발하는 것도 중단을 많이 하고 있고, 그리고 더 이상 내연기관 관련돼서는 신규 제품을 개발을 하지 않는 상태고 등등, 한 지난 몇 년 동안 조금 많은 트랜스포메이션이 진행이 되고 있고요. 지금 이렇게 업체별로 나눠 놨는데 사실 전반적으로 동일한 상황입니다. 이게 반도체 이슈는 계속 진행이 되고 있고, 와이어 하니스 이슈도 동일하게 진행이 되고 있고, 원소재 관련돼서도 여러 업체들이 이제 사출 원소재나 알루미늄, 스틸, 이런 원소재들의 수급 문제 때문에 지금 OEM에서 이렇게 단축을 하고 있는 것처럼 특정 물량에 대해서 생산에 차질이 있기 때문에 각 공장별로 격주별로는 한 달, 매월 이렇게 좀 계속 플랜을 수정을 하고 있는 상황이라고 보시면 될 것 같고요. 그리고 이제 각 회사별로 예를 들면 컨티넨탈 같은 경우는 2030년까지 디젤이나 기존의 이제 내연기관 파워트레인 사업군 관련돼서 한 20여 곳 정도 공장을 폐쇄할 예정이라서 감원도 상당히 많이 지금 진행 중이고, 보시는 이런 반도체 문제를 이제 자체적으로 해결하려고 벌써 이미 몇 년 전부터 준비를 좀 하고 있었던 것 같아요. 그래서 독일의 2곳, 아시아의 말레이시아의 한 곳에서 한 세 곳 정도 반도체 공장에 이제 한 1조 정도 투자를 하면서 올해부터는 이제 자체적으로 반도체 이제 자체 수급이 가능할 정도로 양산을 진행하고 있고요. 나머지 ZF나 셰플러 같은 경우는 워낙 내연기관 쪽에 과거에 이제 부품 본인들의 이제 포트폴리오가 많이 지금 집중이 돼 있는 상황이라서 그쪽 제품들을 많이 좀 줄여가고 있는 상황이고, 특히 ZF 같은 경우는 이제는 더 이상 이런 미케니컬한 부품의 회사의 이미지보다는 전기차나 자율주행 쪽 개발에 상당히 많이 포커스를 하고 집중을 하고 있다고 보시면 될 것 같습니다. 이번 페이지는 독일 OEM들이 그러면 이제 기존의 아시아나 다른 지역에서 셀을 수급을 해왔는데, 유럽에서 자체적으로 이제 내재화를 계획을 하고 있고 이제 내년부터 2023년부터는 거의 이제 생산에 돌입을 하고 있는데 그러한 독일 OEM들의 배터리 셀 내재화 관련돼서 간단하게 설명을 드리겠습니다. 그러니까 오른쪽 그 도표는 조금 작게 나와갖고 보시기 힘들지만 마지막 장에 제가 조금 크게 해서 하나 슬라이드를 해놓도록 하겠습니다. 오른쪽에 보시면 이제 다양한 업체들이 지금 유럽에 셀 생산 계획이랑 어느 정도의 캐파로 셀을 생산을 할 건지 지역별로 이렇게 보시고 계신데요. 과거에 몇 년 전만 해도 이제 국내 배터리 3사가 상당히 많이 이제 비즈니스를 진행을 하고 있었고 중국 업체들이 많이 있었는데 이제 이런 부분도 유럽에서 이런 패권을 아시아 쪽에 더 이상 이제 뺏기지 않으려고 자체적으로 유럽 쪽에 셀 생산지에 투자를 많이 하고 있는 상황입니다. 예를 들어서 그 폴크스바겐 그룹 같은 경우는 여기도 이제 과거에는 국내 3사나 CATL 같은 중국 업체와 많이 비즈니스를 해왔는데 이제 물량이 어느 정도 이제 그 램프업이 되면서 상당한 그 포트폴리오를 모두 이제 전기차 플랫폼으로 대체하게 되면서 이제 많은 수량이 필요하고 업체의 다원화가 필요하기 때문에 2023년부터는 그 스웨덴의 그 노스볼트사나 중국의 고션사와 같이 이제 협력을 해서 독일의 셀 생산지를 지금 짓고 있고요. 최종적으로 한 6개 정도 셀 생산지를 이제 글로벌하게 좀 이렇게 유럽 내에서 그 계획을 하고 있고 이게 총 한 240기가와트 한 400만 대 정도 수준이라고 보시면 될 것 같습니다. 그 메르세데스 벤츠 같은 경우는 지금 초기에는 셀 생산을 이제 자체적으로 내재화할 계획이 없다고 공표를 했는데 작년부터는 그 전략을 약간 변경을 해서 그 여러 그 셀 업체와 협력을 하고 지분 투자도 하면서 유럽 내에서 여러 공장을 지금 한 유럽에 4개, 글로벌하게 한 8개에서 한 200기가와트 정도의 그 셀 공장 계획을 지금 가지고 있고요. 그래서 저가 사양에는 노스볼트사, 약간 하이 퍼포먼스 사양에는 독일의 바타나 커스텀 셀스 같은 회사와 이제 협력을 하고 있고, 그다음에 이제 프랑스의 ACC라는 이제 그 셀 회사에도 지분을 투자해서 프랑스 OEM이랑 이렇게 얼라이언스 형태로 같이 좀 개발을 하고 있다고 보시면 될 것 같아요. BMW는 이런 식으로 이제 어떤 특정 업체에 지분을 사거나 투자를 해서 이제 자체적인 내재화 계획을 아직까지는 가지고 있지 않고요. 지금 기존에 이제 국내 업체랑 많이 비즈니스를 해왔는데 향후 이제 iNext라는 그 전기차 플랫폼에는 그 중국의 CATL사가 독일에 2023년부터 이제 상당히 큰 캐파로 이제 공장을 설립하는데 BMW의 어떤 그 인포메이션에 따르면 그 향후에는 한 70% 정도는 이 중국 CATL사로부터 이제 수급을 할 예정이라고 이렇게 합니다. 그래서 이제 전반적인 이 그 시장 현황을 보면 2035년까지 그 EU 커미티에서 이제 내연기관 판매를 금지를 하고 있는데 독일 OEM들을 보면 한 향후 5년, 2025년까지는 한 50% 정도는 하이브리드를 포함한 전기차로 이제 갈 예정이고 2030년까지는 100% 전기차로 이제 트랜스포메이션을 할 계획을 가지고 있다고 보시면 될 것 같습니다. 각 OEM별 전기차 생산 현황이랑 향후 한 몇 년 동안의 전기차 계획을 간단하게 말씀드릴 텐데요. 2021년 작년에 그 폴크스바겐 그룹 전체적으로 한 37만 대 정도 그 전기차를 판매했는데요. 이 중에 이제 26만 대가 그 풀 BEV 그 배터리를 중심으로 가는 100% 그 배터리 전기차는 한 26만 대 정도로 보시면 될 것 같고, 그다음에 향후 한 5년 정도 계획을 보시면 매년 30만 대 이상은 100% 그 배터리 전기차 그 플랜을 계속 좀 가져갈 예정이고 2026년까지는 한 70개 정도 전기차 모델을 개발 생산 예정이라고 합니다. 2023년부터는 좀 전 슬라이드에 말씀드린 것처럼 이제 자체적인 그 배터리 셀 수급이 이제 유럽에서도 가능하기 때문에 그 수량이 지금 계획된 것보다는 상당히 많아질 거라고 좀 보이고요. 그래서 오른쪽 도표 보시는 대로 각 모델별로 올해부터 한 4, 5년 정도 어느 정도 수량으로 그 전기차 생산을 할지 간단한 오버뷰를 좀 보실 수 있을 것 같아요. BMW 그룹은 2020년 작년에 약 21년 작년에 약 10만 대 정도 전기차를 판매했는데 이 중에 이제 한 36,000대 정도가 그 100% 배터리 그 전기차라고 보시면 될 것 같고요. 2025년까지 한 9개 정도 새로운 모델을 지금 계획 중이고, 그 iNext라고 하는 이제 뭐 전기차 플랫폼에 뭐 유럽, 중국이나 북미 쪽에 글로벌하게 생산 계획을 가지고 있다고 보시면 될 것 같습니다. 오른쪽에 보시면 각 모델별 뭐 대략적인 수량, 뭐 SOP 정도를 보실 수 있고요. 메르세데스 벤츠 같은 경우도 작년에 23만 대 정도 전기차, 하이브리드를 포함한 전기차를 생산했는데 한 49,000대 정도가 이제 100% 배터리 전기차라고 보시면 될 것 같고, 벤츠 같은 경우도 EQ라는 플랫폼으로 다양한 모델을 지금 생산을 하고 있고, 그리고 2022년 올해 이후로 한 4, 5년 정도의 계획을 이렇게 보면 2025년까지는 총 생산량이 한 50% 정도는 전기차 모델로 지금 생산 계획을 하고 있다고 보시면 될 것 같고요. 오른쪽에 보시면 한 2, 3년 정도의 각각의 모델별로 생산 대수를 좀 보실 수 있습니다. 이번 슬라이드는 그 독일은 사실 다른 유럽 국가랑 틀리게 물론 동유럽 쪽에 이제 생산지가 많이 있긴 한데 그 독일의 OEM들이나 다른 부품 회사들도 독일을 전기차 생산에 R&D나 생산 관련돼서도 헤드쿼터로 좀 많이 그 디파인을 하고 있는 그런 상황이 많이 진행이 되고 있어서 각 지역별로 상당히 많이 그 전기차 생산 공장이 포진이 돼 있어요. 그래서 그 각 OEM별로 어떤 지역에 어떤 모델이나 아니면 어떤 부품군, 전기차, 일렉트릭 파워트레인이나 이런 부품군이 어떻게 좀 그 포진이 돼 있는지 한번 보실 수 있고, 이런 그 각 도시별로 좀 이런 클러스터를 좀 파악을 해 놓으시는 게 향후에 본인들이 이제 독일 회사랑 이제 비즈니스를 하게 되면 어느 지역에 어떤 클러스터군에 본인들 제품이 그 비즈니스가 된다고 하면 그런 클러스터군에 그 외에도 다양한 그 회사들이 많이 포진이 돼 있거든요. 그래서 그런 지역별 영업 활동 하시는데 참고를 좀 하실 수 있을 것 같아서 간단하게 오버뷰를 한번 보여드리는 슬라이드고요. 최근 그 독일 거래선들이 소싱하고 있는 부품군을 간단하게 보시면 커머디티별로 다양합니다, 사실은. 그래서 배터리 관련돼서 다양한 알루미늄 다이캐스팅 제품들, 배터리 외에도 일렉트릭 파워트레인이나 이런 쪽에 적용이 되는 다양한 알루미늄 캐스팅 제품들, 그리고 배터리 컨트롤이나 다양한 시스템 컨트롤을 하기 위한 컨트롤러가 필요하겠죠. 그 안에 들어가는 이제 PCB 제품도 이제 단독적으로 소싱을 원하는 회사들도 많이 있고, 다양한 내장재나 일렉트릭 모터나 이런 쪽에 이제 적용되는 액추에이터, 그리고 그 수소 차량, 퓨얼셀 차량에 적용되는 다양한 센서류들, 그리고 하이볼티지 하니스나 다양한 하니스와 이제 센서가 같이 이제 좀 그 서브 어셈블리로 이제 적용되는 그런 제품군들, 그다음에 전기차든 수소차든 항상 메이저 제품군이 되는 컨버터나 인버터류들, 그리고 전기차나 이런 배터리 쪽에 이제 항상 그 열 관리 시스템이 중요하기 때문에 쿨링을 할 수 있는 다양한 부품군들, 이런 제품들이 이제 최근에 많이 이제 소싱 그 인포메이션에 많이 좀 올라오고 있는 상태고, 일반적인 메케니컬한 제품도 많이 소싱을 하고 있는 상태입니다. 그래서 이런 부품군들을 그 국내 업체들이 그럼 각각 그 어떤 형태로 좀 대응을 해야 되는지 간단하게 좀 말씀을 드리면, 이 전기전자 제품 컨트롤러나 인버터나 배터리 관련된 컨트롤 시스템이나 이런 전기전자 부품에는 항상 이제 그 소프트웨어 개발 시에 그 세이프티 레벨, AC 레벨이라고 하는 레벨이 우리 제품이 등급별로 B 아니면 C 등급 정도가 거래선에서 요구를 하는 건지 이런 거는 좀 파악을 하셔야 될 것 같고, 그 외에도 이제 A 스파이스 레벨이나 오토사 사용 어느 정도 버전으로 개발을 해야 되는지 이런 게 이제 거래선에서 요구하는 부분을 좀 파악을 하셔야 될 것 같고, 그다음에 그 수소차 관련돼서 센서류 관련돼서는 폭발 관련된 어떤 그 서티피케이션, 아텍스라고 하는 서티피케이션을 우리가 보유를 하고 있는지, 이런 다양한 서티피케이션을 좀 파악을 하셔야 될 것 같고, 물론 이제 소프트웨어나 하드웨어 개발하는 데 있어서 엔지니어들과의 이제 뭐 다이렉트한 커뮤니케이션이 상당히 중요합니다. 이거는. 그래서 뭐 이건 언어적인 측면뿐만 아니고 이런 기술적인 측면에서 그 다이렉트로 이제 엔지니어들끼리 서로 협력을 할 수 있는 그런 상태가 될 수 있도록 전사적으로 좀 노력을 하셔야 될 것 같고, 일반적인 미케니컬 부품들은 그 과거랑 그렇게 뭐 많이 차이가 나는 것 같지는 않아요. 그래서 이제 뭐 RFQ가 나온 제품들을 이렇게 보면 보통 업체들이 캐리오버를 통해서 기존에 이제 본인들이 양산을 하고 있는 제품을 뭐 조금 모디파이를 해서 생산을 할 수 있는 이력이 있거나, 아니면 이원화되어 있는 제품을 일원화로 해서 약간 뭐 단가 경쟁력을 좀 올릴 수 있거나, 뭐 이런 상태가 될 수 있으면 참 좋을 것 같고, 뭐 기존 거래선들도 워낙 최근에 이제 일반적인 그 단품들은 단가를 상당히 낮게 책정을 하고 있어서 기존 거래선 양산가 대비 뭐 한 뭐 15%, 20% 이상 사실 경쟁력이 있어야 하는데 쉽진 않죠. 하여튼 참고를 하셨으면 좋겠고, 그다음에 이제 장기적으로 뭐 초기 대응할 때부터 그 코스트 리덕션 관련의 개념을 가지고 거래선 쪽에 계속 이런 베너핏을 줄 수 있는 그런 부분도 상당히 중요하고, 그다음에 현지화는 뭐 항상 과거도 그렇고 최근은 사실 뭐 이런 코로나 이슈나 전쟁 이슈 때문에 뭐 좀 더 심해진 것 같아요. 많이 심해진 것 같긴 한데, 뭐 생산지를 바로 로컬라이제이션 하기 힘든 업체들은 뭐 이런 웨어하우스나 아니면 로지스틱 쪽이나 아니면 R&D 쪽만이라도 뭐 현지화를 해서 거래선에 대응하는 게 상당히 중요할 거라고 판단됩니다. 그리고 R&D 관련돼서 이제 뭐 개발하는데 거래선과 같이 협력을 할 경우에 그 선행 프로젝트 관련 그 RFQ 같은 경우에는 뭐 전체적인 이제 프레임만 주는 이런 RFQ들이 많이 있어요. 그래서 그 뭐 A부터 Z까지 모든 걸 이렇게 맞추라라고 하는 그런 경우는 좀 드물고, 이런 전반적인 그 이런 프레임에 맞게 너희가 개발을 해라, 이런 식의 이제 RFQ가 많이 오기 때문에 그런 부분에 대응할 수 있는 능력을 좀 키우시는 게 중요할 것 같고, 이제 장기적인 엔지니어와의 관계 유지하는 게 뭐 유럽 같은 경우는 구매와의 관계 유지보다는 중요합니다. 왜냐하면 구매들은 최근에 좀 빠르면 뭐 한 2년, 뭐 길면 한 3년 이렇게 계속 로테이션이 되기 때문에 그 연구소에 있는 엔지니어들과 관계 유지가 상당히 중요하고, 그러기 위해서는 연구소 쪽에도 거래선에 이제 그 국내 업체들이 계속 선행적으로 뭐 개발하고 있는 이런 기술들이나 거래선에 베네핏을 줄 수 있는 이런 기술들을 지속적으로 어필하는 게 상당히 중요하다고 보고 있고요. 그래서 이런 프로세스가 많이 진행이 되면 이제 뭐 최종적으로 이제 오디트를 하고, 그 오디트에는 이제 프로세스랑 뭐 프로세스 오디시 있을 수 있고 R&D 오디시 있을 수 있고 병행해서 있을 수도 있는데, 그런 독일의 이제 VDA라는 그 스탠다드 기준에 맞춘 그런 오디트를 전사적으로 준비를 해야 될 것 같고, 그 이런 오디트를 잘 통과하시려면 뭐 전사적으로 PM 조직이 반드시 필요합니다. 그래서 PM 조직 관련돼서는 뭐 별도로 좀 한번 고민을 많이 해보시면 좋을 것 같아요. 마지막 장은 제가 아까 그 슬라이드 9번째 슬라이드에 보여드렸던 작은 그림을 좀 확대해서 하나 뭐 이렇게 좀 어태치를 한 부분이고요. 이렇게 해서 오늘 발표는 여기까지로 마치도록 하겠습니다. 감사합니다.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chong, for the very interesting presentation. I think we have time for one quick question that came in during your presentation. So I'm going to read it out in English. The question is, how can Korean companies prepare for VDA audit related to German customers?
네, 답변을 좀 간단하게 드리면요. 좀 되게 좀 뭐 그 전체 프로세스를 아시려고 그러면 뭐 상당히 복잡한 그 항목이긴 한데, 일반적으로 거래선에서 그 오디트를 하기 전에 어느 정도의 가이드라인을 제공을 하고는 있어요. 프로세스 오디트는 어떤 형태로 진행이 되고 R&D 오디트는 어떤 형태로 진행이 된다, 이런 가이드라인을 일반적으로 좀 받으실 수 있고, 만약에 그런 가이드라인 자체가 없다고 하시면 한국에도 이런 그 VDA 그 6.3 기준으로 하는 오디트를 코칭을 받으실 수 있는 기관들이 다 있거든요. 그래서 그런 기관을 좀 찾으시거나 아니면 해외 컨설팅 업체를 찾으시거나 하셔서 이 전체적인 일반적으로 이 오디트 자체는 제품을 생산할 때 컨셉부터 양산까지 그 모든 단계에 있는 그 절차를 다 감사를 하는 거기 때문에 그 각각의 카테고리에 있는 항목들을 그 가이드라인에 따라서 좀 준비를 하시면 될 것 같아요. 이상입니다.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chung, for the interesting presentation and the discussion. And I would like to close the sessions here. And once again, thank you to our 4 presenters for the very interesting insights on the current developments in the automotive industry, and to all participants who joined us today. I would like to remind that we still have the second part of our GP Europe event open, which will be the matchmaking sessions. So if you're interested in sourcing new suppliers, pursue benchmarking, or get in touch with potential Korean business partners, please feel free to apply for our one-on-one business meetings. You can register via the gpeurope2022.eu page, which is on screen right now, the invitation you received, or simply contact our office for more information, or if you have any more questions to our presenters that we couldn't cover during our sessions today. Thank you very much and have a nice day.